So let us talk about Redux. Redux is also a global state management tool in React, like context, although it is used on much bigger projects when there are multiple people working on the same project. In those cases, we use Redux to handle state updations. Now, Redux as an entity can be used with Vanilla JS, React, Angular. What we are studying is React Redux, the React binding of Redux. As of the latest version, React Redux has made some changes. So what we study today is known as Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit is minor changes over the React Redux. So Redux Toolkit है जो हम अभी पढ़ने वाले हैं, डाउनलोड करके उसका यूज करने वाले हैं. फर्स्ट ऑफ, यूज कैसे होता है, इंस्टॉल कैसे होता है. दिस इज अ फ्रेश रिएक्ट इंस्टॉल, अभी अभी हमने इंस्टॉल किया है. एंड मेन जेएसएक्स को, जैसा कि आप देख पा रहे हो, मैंने हल्का सा चेंज कर दिया है दीज थिंग्स. तो सबसे पहले रिएक्ट रिडक्स एंड रिडक्स टूलकिट बोथ हमें डाउनलोड करने पड़ेंगे. रिएक्ट रिडक्स @redux js/toolkit, ये दो चीजें हमें इंस्टॉल करनी पड़ेगी. इंस्टॉल होने देते हैं इनको. एंड डन. रिएक्ट वापस चालू कर लेते हैं. मेन जेएसएक्स को, जैसा कि हमने कहा, वी विल हैव अ काउंटर फंक्शन फ्रॉम काउंटर जेएसएक्स. सो ये फाइल बना देते हैं. एज द नेम सजेस्ट, काउंटर में वही काउंटर वाला प्रोग्राम रहेगा, सिंपल सा. फॉर दैट, लेट मी वेरी क्विकली मेक 2 buttons and a paragraph. यूआई में तो यही रहेगा. नाउ अभी हमें देखना है स्टोर, फिर हमें देखना है स्लाइस. स्टोर क्या है, स्लाइस क्या है, वो चीजें जो रिडक्स में बेसिक हैं, उनके बारे में पहले बात करेंगे. सबसे पहले मैं बना रहा हूँ एक स्टोर. ना, व्हाट इज अ स्टोर. कॉन्टेक्स्ट में और रिडक्स में एक सबसे बड़ा जो एक मेजर डिफरेंस जो है वो ये. कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आपके एप्लीकेशन के अंदर ही, आपकी प्रोग्रामिंग वाली फाइल्स के साथ ही आपकी स्टेट्स आप स्टोर करते थे. रिडक्स में they have a particular place for them, which is store. Store is the one stop solution for all, or is the one stop place for all your state variables. src में ही, let me create a file. You can capitalize it or you cannot, it's not a necessary. You can make it as JSX or JS, because it is not a component, so it is not mandatory to make it as a JSX file. So configure store, मैंने जैसा बताया थोड़ी देर पहले, हम रिडक्स टूलकिट यूज कर रहे हैं. रिएक्ट रिडक्स में फंक्शन चलता था क्रिएट स्टोर. रिएक्ट टूलकिट में चलता है कॉन्फ़िगर स्टोर. कॉन्फ़िगर स्टोर की अगर आप डेफिनेशन में देखेंगे, फ्रेंडली एब्स्ट्रैक्शन ओवर द स्टैंडर्ड रिडक्स इज क्रिएट स्टोर. रिडक्स टूलकिट ने यही किया है, नए रैपर पहना दिए हैं रिडक्स के, कुछ रिएक्ट रिडक्स के कुछ फंक्शंस को. जैसे क्रिएट स्टोर था पहले, अब है कॉन्फ़िगर स्टोर. कॉन्फ़िगर स्टोर फंक्शन को कॉल किया, इट टेक्स एन ऑप्शंस ऑब्जेक्ट. इसके अंदर मैंने लिख दिया रिड्यूसर, विच इज ऑल्सो एन ऑब्जेक्ट. फिलहाल इतना ही उसमें हमने लिखा. Let's store it in a variable and let's export this variable. So this is our store, which will hold information about something known as reducer. Reducer, if you remember, हमने last reducer जब पढ़े थे, use reducer, वहां भी देखा था. Reducer is nothing but a bunch of functions that will modify our state. सो स्टोर में हमने बताया कि रिड्यूसर कहाँ से आएंगे, कल फिलहाल बताया नहीं है बट हमने उसके लिए ऑप्शन डाल दिया है. फॉर नाउ दिस इज व्हाट आवर स्टोर विल बी. वन मोर डिफरेंस विद Redux एंड Redux टूलकिट. Redux में state variables and the functions to modify the state, that is the reducers, वो भी store में ही लिखे जाते थे. But in toolkit they have their own separate space known as slice. So in source let me create another file. Let's call it slice.js. Again आप इसको capitalize कर सकते हैं, आप JSX लगा सकते हैं, it's your choice. फंक्शन कॉल किया मैंने create slice. Create slice भी will take an option object. This will take three key value pairs: name and initial state, which will be an object, and reducers, this will be plural, which will also be an object. Now let me name it counter. You can name it whatever you want. Initial state object will hold one or how many state variables that you want. This particular program, we only need one state variable. Let's call it count. Also, the initial value that will have, the count will have 0. Reducers will contain the group of functions that will modify this state. In this particular example, we just need two functions, one to increment the state and one to decrement the state. So let me write them. Increment count, which will be a function. Okay, let me do it this. Very similarly, decrement count, which will also be a function. These are the reducer functions, just like use reducer. And also like use reducer, the reducer function will take two arguments, current state object and an action. Current state object and an action. Now, what these functions will do is increment count will modify the state variable count and will what it will actually do, it will actually plus it, increment it by 1, minus 1. As simple as that. Yes, is this in this particular example, we have not used action. If you want, you can remove them. If you want, you can remove them, or you can have them, still your choice. It won't cause any harm. So now we have three independent files. We have a UI counter, we have a store, we have a slice. Now the actual transfer of data from here to there, that will begin. Now, as you can see on UI, in this paragraph, we need that count variable, which is in slice. This 0 or the value of this count we need here. We have these two functions, increment count, decrement count, that those will be called, those will be invoked when we'll click these buttons. That means the state, the reducers have to be exported from this file so that they can be used somewhere, someplace else. Also, as was the case with reducers, same is the case with Redux as well. Whenever there's a action from the user, yes, on the click of this button, the increment count reducer has to be called. On the click of this button, the increment count, decrement count reducer function has to be called. However, for any user activity, the first thing that will be called is the dispatch function. That dispatch will dispatch an action object. So we have to create those as well. Let us do all that. What have I written here? With reducers, we created the action objects ourselves. Action वाले object हमने खुद बनाए थे. यहाँ पे with Redux, I just stated two names that we have two action objects. One will have the type as increment count and the other will have the type as decrement count. Slice dot action. Now slice is the name of the variable we provided create slice it. If I had named it something else here, वो name यहाँ पे भी होता. Slice dot actions creates our action, creates our object, and equates the type property to increment count, equates the type property to decrement count. Slice dot action आपके लिए दो ऑब्जेक्ट बना रहा है. दोनों में जो टाइप की है उसमें एक में वैल्यू डाली है इंक्रीमेंट काउंट, एक में वैल्यू डाली है डिक्रीमेंट काउंट. इस लाइन से हमारे दो एक्शन बन गए. यही दोनों एक्शन कॉल होंगे रिस्पेक्टिवली इन बटन्स के क्लिक होने पर. Okay, if you also remember, in store, we still have an option pending called reducer. वो reducer कहाँ से आएगा? This object of all the reducer functions. This reducer function, let me export it. Let's call it slice reducer. And let's export it. Default slice reducer. So we have exported two things from here, actions and reducer. This reducer will go on in the store. From here, import slice reducer from slice. Now, since this is also an object, sorry, that means the object will have a key value pair. Yes, the value is of course slice reducer. It must have a key because it's an object. Let's have a key counter. You can have it whatever you want. This for now completes our store. So we have the reducer functions and we have exported the store. Also, from the slice, we exported actions as well. Now, where will this action go? This action will go into the UI file. On click of this button and on click of this button, we will call those actions. However, the first thing on any user action in a reducer or a Redux file is the dispatch. However, we do not have that dispatch right now. Where will that dispatch come from? Worry not, in Redux, we have a hook useDispatch coming from React Redux. useDispatch returns the dispatch function from the Redux store. That dispatch is what we will be calling here. But first, let us store it in a variable called dispatch. So this is our dispatch, which will dispatch the action, as you can see. Now, actions, we already have those actions by the name increment count, decrement count. Here, the increment count action will be called. You have to call in the actions increment count, decrement count as like this, as functions. In this particular variable, in this particular example, we are not passing any payload here, right? But down the line, you will have the need to pass some payload. That payload will be going here. That's why increment count and decrement count are called as functions here. Now, what about this paragraph? यहाँ पे वो 0 आना है from this initial state. To access this initial state object in our UI, we need another hook called useSelect. useSelector is useSelector, a function that receives a current state and returns a part of the state. useSelector receives a function. This function will receive the state object from the slice. As an argument, you can call it whatever you want. This state holds this object. That state variable holds this object. Now, for this particular example, we only have one variable count. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say return that particular variable count. So useSelector will return that count variable, which I'm going to use here. In our UI, in our browser, we are still not getting anything. If you look at the error, it says could not find React Redux context value. Please ensure the component is wrapped in a provider. This is the last thing that we need to do here. If you remember, we exported the store as well. Now we exported two things from slice and we have used both of them. We have exported store, but we did not use it anywhere. Let us do that now. So just like in context, we had a provider. This counter will also be wrapped in a provider. This provider will be coming from React Redux. And this provider will have an attribute called store. Now that store will take our single Redux store variable's name, which in this case was also store. So this store is, we cannot change it. This name can be absolutely anything. This completes our very basic setup of React Redux. Okay, still not completed. We are not getting the value for the state. Okay. Let's see. What did we do wrong? Slice initial state count. Counter count. Okay. Let's see if we are getting this count or not. Okay, it is undefined. Sure. Okay. Let's see if we are getting this state.count or not. Undefined. Okay. So we are not getting the state from the slice itself. Okay. Let me tell you why. We needed to export this create slice or the slice variable as well. Let us see if we get it now. Let's see. Something is still missing. Yes. Okay. Fantastic. So one thing that we missed, actually, this export is not necessary. This export is not necessary. What we actually missed was state is the initial state object from slice dot your reducer name state dot reducer name dot the name of the state variable. So state dot counter dot count. This is what we needed to do. And as you can see, increment and decrement count are working very fine. Well, this is the very basic setup of React Redux. We will be looking at some complicated examples as we go along as well. This is for now. Thank you very much.